This morning's lesson is regarding who is called the Antichrist, and I call it a Jewish fable. The entire series of lessons involves end times madness, the Middle East, premillennialism, Zionism, but in this specific lesson, we're looking at the popular theory regarding the so-called Antichrist, but in actuality, it is simply and solely a Jewish fable. We'll see how that is as we proceed along the way. Several years ago, there was a popular movie that came out. Actually, I really enjoy it. It's called National Treasure. And in it, the character is Ben Gates, who is played by Nicolas Cage. Ben Gates is a code breaker. And as a code breaker and a reader of mysterious signs from the past, he is seeking a national treasure that supposedly was buried somewhere in the United States from the days of our founding fathers. Consequently, in his quest, he has a team, and they go to the Arctic, and they go to a ship that was buried in the ice far below the surface, and they were able to come up with an ivory pipe, and the pipe has a stem on it. Then you take the stem off, and then you put ink on it, and you roll it out on a piece of paper, and it has letters. Those letters lead you to the Declaration of Independence, which is, of course, in Independence Hall. And so they go and they steal the Declaration of Independence, and then they bring the Declaration to his father's house, and on the back of it there's supposed to be a code, but it is not seen by the visible eye, not visibly seen by the eye, and so they have to put lemon juice on it and put a hair dryer on it, so they see numbers and letters that begin to appear. All of those send them to the Silas Dogood letters of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin wrote some anonymous letters under the pen name of Silas Dogood. And so all the numbers matched up with certain letters, certain lines and letters in the script. And then you put all those together, and that leads you to the Liberty Bell, and then that leads you to something else, and finally they come to the National Treasure. But the idea is that all of these secret codes lead you to some kind of great treasure if you can stick with it and find it. That's exactly what we have regarding the so-called Antichrist. Many modern-day preachers and prognosticators, they tell us that they have a code system. They are able to go through the Bible and pick out different passages that tell us certain things that all about the Antichrist that's going to come, and it's all part of the premillennial Zionist theory, the Antichrist, and all of these things they bring together. So, for example, I have an illustration on the screen, which is in front of you, comes from Robert Jeffress, who was the pastor, so-called, at the First Baptist Church here in Wichita Falls several years ago. Now he's at one of the largest First Baptist churches in the country. It's in Dallas, Texas, about 16,000 members. And one of his online sermons has this particular map. He didn't draw the map, but he's actually laying out the idea of how can we determine who is the Antichrist. And so, first of all, he starts with 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which is in the middle of the screen. Here in 2 Thessalonians 2, we have the man of sin that is discussed. As you might recall the context, verse 3 refers to a man of sin, but we are told in verses 6 and 7 that he is not going to be revealed until he is removed. That is, that which restrains is removed. He said that refers to Gentiles or Christians rather, being removed so that the Antichrist might be revealed. Then we go to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation 13 in verse 1 speaks about a beast that rises out of the sea. He said this must refer to Gentiles, a Gentile nation. So the Antichrist is going to come from a Gentile country. Then we have, or he must be a Gentile. Number 3, we run to Daniel chapter 9, back to the Old Testament, and we find in this prophecy of the 70 weeks that we have here a reference to certain things that are going to take place, and so he brings those into it. Then we run back to Daniel chapter 7, where we have he is going to change the times and the laws, the seasons and the laws, from verses 25 and 26. And so the Antichrist is going to remove and change the signs and the seasons and the laws. Then we run back to Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, according to G.H. Lang, who added to this kind of a theory. And this, of course, is popular and is on every hand, and you can find it in the bookstore. And Revelation 13 and 18, of course, refers to the 666, the enigmatic symbology in the book of Revelation. And this is the Antichrist. We also have added to it, for example, Daniel chapter 11. Daniel 11, G.H. Lang, who's an older commentary, says this: everyone agrees that Daniel chapter 11 refers to the Antichrist. And so it must be, of course, referring to the Antichrist. So let's just stop for a moment and think about all of this. Number one, not one single solitary passage here, not one, mentions the Antichrist. And yet every single passage is supposedly referring to the Antichrist. How can this possibly be the case? This is simply illegitimate Bible study. It's illegitimate exegesis. It is not in accordance with anything that the Bible actually teaches. Number two, whatever happened to the local context of a passage? One of the premier basic principles of Bible study is every text should be guided by the local context. And what does that local context actually teach? Sometimes I grow discouraged because so many people in the pews, whether it be here or elsewhere or wherever, and they take a passage or they take simply a phrase from the Bible and they run all over creation with it. And I say, what does the local context of that particular phrase teach? That doesn't matter at all. It makes no difference whatsoever what a local context is to say. I think, well, this is discouraging, but I can't be too discouraged because even the preachers in the pulpits that are paid big bucks do the same thing. And they just come together, they string together like pearls all these different passages that are disparate, that is, they have no bearing on each other at all, and not one of them mentions the Antichrist at all, and all of them supposedly teach about the Antichrist. How is possibly can that be? I thought about this illustration. I was talking with my brother the other day on the phone. He said, think about this. He said, let's just say, for example, that we were digging through the sands of Egypt and we discovered a letter. And that letter says something to the effect, for example, well, the king appreciates the gift that you gave, and then he will recompense you for it. And you're going to, okay, now what are we going to do? Well, okay, what is that? Who's the king? Who's doing the writing? What's the gift? What's the occasion? Do we know? Well, we don't know. We have to go about and find out what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense unless we find the context. So exactly, if you found a letter that said, well, the signifiers, and this was actually discovered at Lachish, the signifiers are seen from your mountain to us, and we know that the end is near, something to that effect. All right, what's the context? Who's invading? Apparently there's an invasion. What signifiers? What do the signifiers mean? How does this what is the information that is being relayed on this signifier? We don't know anything like that, except we have to go find out from the context. That is the way that everyone does with any kind of historical document, correct? Except when it comes to God's holy word. It makes no difference whatsoever about a local context, and even if the passage, and none of the passages mention a so-called enigmatic figure called the Antichrist, all of them supposedly teach about the Antichrist. I am absolutely stunned that this is so popular in the world today. I just think, what have we come to? Let's just take a glance at the passages for just a moment. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 refers to the man of sin that would be revealed. I have an idea of that to which Paul is referring, but he certainly never mentions anything such as the Antichrist. And he tells us the second coming will not occur until the man of sin is revealed, and he will sit in the temple of God, setting himself forth as God. What is that referring to? I'm not certain. But I have an idea regarding it, but it certainly does not mention anything regarding the Antichrist. How about Revelation 13 and 1? Revelation 13 and 1 speaks about a beast coming up out of the sea. Here is the interesting thing regarding Revelation. Revelation begins and ends with warning signs telling you when these things are to occur. So if, for example, you were to enter into the Temple of Solomon in the Old Testament, you would walk between two pillars on either side of the doorway. And those pillars were called Jachin and Boaz. When you walk into a book of the Bible, you have pillars that are time markers and signals about how these things are to be understood. And so you have a Jachin and Boaz at the beginning and end of Revelation. How does Revelation begin? Revelation chapter 1 and verse 1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show unto his servants, even the things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John, who bare witness unto the word of his grace, even of all things that he saw. The end of verse 3 tells us the time is at hand. What are the two phrases upon which all of this turns? Shortly to come to pass, for you people then to whom he's writing, and the time is at hand, it's near. At the end of the book, chapter 22, verses 6 through 10, we have exactly the same information. In the same phraseology, the time is at hand, shortly to come to pass. Over and over again throughout the book, we have the same type of information. What license do we have to take that information as modern premillennialists do today and taking chapter 4 all the way through chapter 19, rip it out of its context and say, no, it refers to something far in the future, even in our future? That is absolutely illegitimate to the extreme. How about Daniel chapter 9? Daniel 9, 24 through 27, an interesting text, but our Lord quotes it in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15 when he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, let them that are in the mountains, then he tells them to flee. And he says in verse 34 of Matthew 24, this generation will not pass away till all of these things be accomplished. And our Lord quotes Daniel 9 as being fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. How in the world can we take a passage such as Daniel 9 and throw it into the future? You know what they do? They say, well, and Robert Jeffress does this as well as all of them do. Well, this is the Roman Empire revived. In other words, they recognize it was to be fulfilled in the Roman Empire, but according to their schemes, it was not fulfilled, so we have to have a revival of the Roman Empire in the future. So you know, at World War II period, when Mussolini joined in a pact with Hitler, all of them were excited because, okay, he's a Roman. And therefore, we had the Roman Empire revived. Such illegitimacy is hard to fathom. How about Daniel chapter 7? Daniel 7, speaking about the kingdoms, of which he also spoke in chapter 2, referring to the Babylonian, then the Persian, the Greeks, and the Roman, and he's referring to the same thing. How about Revelation? Revelation we've already noted, referring to the time at that time in those period and those people. Here's another text. Daniel chapter 11 frequently is used by prognosticators telling us, well, Daniel 11, everybody agrees, is referring to the Antichrist. Daniel chapter 11 begins telling you that the entire text is referring to the Persians and the Greeks. By what parity of reasoning do we say, no, it refers to something that we want to talk about called the Antichrist? It's absolutely stunning to me that this has captivated the imagination of so many people when sober Bible exegesis does not allow any of it. Not one passage mentions the Antichrist here, and the local context of each passage disallows throwing it into the future. It is absolutely sad to me. So I want, before we move on, you to think about a text, and that's in 1 Timothy chapter 1, beginning in verse 3. 1 Timothy chapter 1, beginning in verse 3, the passage that was read in your hearing by Brother Randy a moment ago. Paul says, as I exhorted thee to tarry at Ephesus when I was going into Macedonia, that thou mightest charge certain men not to teach a different doctrine, neither to give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questionings, rather than a dispensation, that is a government of God, which is in faith. So do I now. endless genealogies and fables. From whence came those fables? Those are Jewish fables. He tells us that in a parallel text in Titus chapter 1 when he writes to another young preacher and says, you beware of the fables, and he calls them Jewish fables and endless genealogies. And anyone who is acquainted with the Jewish system of belief recognizes that there are countless fables of the wildest extreme nature connected thereto. And as you will see, the Antichrist concept comes right out of Judaism and the Jewish fables. We'll see more about that in just a moment. But now let's, for the sake of this lesson, let's think about the passages that do mention Antichrist in the text. There are only 4 texts. Only 4 texts in the New Testament that mentions Antichristos, Antichrist, and here are the 4. 1 John chapter 2, beginning in verse 18. Little children, it is the last hour. And as you heard that Antichrist comes, even now have there arisen many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last hour. They, that is the Antichrist, they went out from us, but they were not of us. For had they been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out that they might be made manifest that they all are not of us. Now what did he say? He tells us that Antichrists, plural, were already there. And they were in the church at one point and apparently denying the lordship of Christ and other elements of Jesus' lordship. And they were already there preaching their false doctrine. Let's go to verse 22. Who is the liar but he that denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, even he that denies the Father and the Son. He that denies the Son, the same has not the Father. He that confesses the Son has the Father also. Who is the one who is called Antichrist here in this text? Those who deny that Jesus is the Christ. That shoe fits whether it be Gnostics that came in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, 1st century Jews, or modern evolutionists and everyone who denies that Jesus Christ is the Lord. It fits everyone. And that's what he tells us. Who is the liar but he that denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, even he, everyone that denies the Father and the Son. 1 John chapter 4 is the next passage. Look at this one for just a moment. This is so fascinating to think about because 1 John chapter 4, he tells us, Beloved, believe not every spirit. Now, the Spirit here refers to those who pretended to be inspired of the Holy Spirit. So he tells us, beginning in verse 1, Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they be of God. For there are many false prophets gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of Christ. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. He that confesses not Jesus is not of God, and this is the spirit of the Antichrist, even he that denies the Father and the Son. The Antichrist is simply a disposition that existed in the 1st century that denies the Father and the Son and denies the lordship of Jesus Christ specifically. How about 2 John verse 7? 2 John 7, he tells us there are many deceivers in the world. They that deny that Jesus is come in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Let's summarize. Number 1, there is not one single individual that is called the Antichrist. It is a disposition, it is an attitude, it is a rebellious attitude that tells us that Jesus Christ is not the Lord and that he did not come in the flesh. That's number 1. There's not an individual that is called the Antichrist. Number 2, it was already in the world at that time. There is no prophecy about any individual in all of God's holy book that tells us that there's going to be a future person come calling the Antichrist. Now that is the sum total of what the New Testament teaches regarding Antichristos. Isn't it absolutely amazing, stunningly amazing, that so many preachers would take these passages and the words here and apply them to some mysterious figure that will come in the future, that's not exegesis at all. That is not honoring God's Word. So let's go to the next point. Where's the origin? Where do you suppose the origin of this concept came? Where does the origin of the Antichrist concept originate? Where did it originate? There are several people that I want to put on the board, simply noting quickly. Number one, Ralph Earl tells us, he has a book called The Word Studies in the New Testament. I thought it was interesting. In his book regarding certain comments on certain passages, he said, the concept of an Antichrist comes from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, where the certain church fathers applied the term Antichrist for some mysterious figure that would come in the future. Oh, okay. So it's not Bible, but it comes from couple of fathers in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Then we have Joyce Baldwin, who wrote a great commentary on the book of Daniel in the Tyndale Old Testament commentary series. She tells us the same thing, but she names a couple of them. One was Theodotion, another one was Hippolytus. These applied, Theodotion, Hippolytus, applied the term Antichrist to, once again, some mysterious figure. But it was not widespread understanding. It was not a widespread consideration. It was simply what they believe to be the case. Not Bible. Then we have, number 3, John Nelson Darby. We've mentioned Darby in the past regarding the series of lessons. John Nelson Darby was he who took a Jewish belief system, and he tells us, number 1, we have to have a literal interpretation of all passages in the Old Testament. That is his judgment call, which is wrong, because the Bible shows us that is not the way to interpret all Old Testament texts. Number 2, he says that church and Israel are always to stay separate. Never shall the two meet, Israel over here and the church over here. And it was John Nelson Darby who came up with the concept of one single, mysterious, enigmatic figure called the Antichrist. As a matter of fact, you'll notice this. G.H. Lang, whom I mentioned a moment ago, I thought in his commentary on Daniel chapter 11, I wonder who he references as referring this to the Antichrist in Daniel 11. John Nelson Darby. He said that's what Darby believed. Oh, okay. John Nelson Darby, who had a Jewish concept. But let's notice another thing. I want you to listen to these scholars. This is Joseph Thayer, who wrote one of the great lexicons of the Greek language. It was of yesteryears, probably maybe over 100 years ago. He chose us, it was a Jewish fable. The adversary of the Messiah, to appear just before the Messiah's advent, concerning whom the Jews had diverse opinions, derived partly from Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 11, there we go, and Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's a Jewish fable. So Thayer identifies it. This is from William Alexander. William Alexander was a great scholar in the Church of England over a century ago. F. Cannon Cook asked him to write the text or the commentary on Daniel in the Bible commentary series. It's an out-of-print edition now, but here's what William Alexander, who is a widely known scholar, says regarding the concept of the Antichrist. Listen carefully. The Jews derive their conception from Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Ezekiel 38 and 39. Same thing Thayer said. The name, that is Antichristos, was probably formed by John. It was believed by the Jews that Antichrist would appear before the advent of the Messiah. So the Jews had in their fable system the idea that there would be an Antichristos person or anti-Messiah, an individual that would appear. That's where it came from. It came from Judaism and the Jewish fable system that they have. One more, James Hastings, in Hastings' Dictionary of the Bible. There was among the Jews a fully developed legend of Antichrist, perhaps oral, but more perhaps written, which was accepted and amplified by Christians, and that legend diverges and contradicts in important points the conceptions we find in the book of Revelation. All of these scholars point correctly to the fact that it comes from Judaism. Who is this Antichrist, supposedly, that the Jews invented? They call him Armilus. And he is found in the apocalyptic books that they have, all called the Midrashim, and it comes from the Geonic period. Geonic would be in the Middle Ages. But reaching back into what the Jewish writings had, they called the Haggadah, they had a concept of an anti-Messiah personage. So where does the whole thing come from? Judaism and the Jewish fables and myths that Paul pointed out in 1 Timothy chapter 1. That's where it comes from. It's not Bible at all. So as we conclude, I want you to look at 1 Timothy chapter 1 again. Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 1. We're going to go back to verses 3 and following. As I exhorted thee to tarry at Ephesus, when I was going into Macedonia, that thou mightest charge certain men not to teach a different doctrine, neither to give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questionings, rather than a dispensation of God, which is in faith, so do I now. But the end of the charge is love out of a pure heart, and faith unfeigned, from which things some having swerved, and good conscience and faith unfeigned, from which things some having swerved have turned aside unto vain talking. What does Paul warn here? He warns to avoid Jewish fables, avoid the Jewish myths, because they have no bearing on practical Christianity. He tells us instead, the end of the charge, that is the goal of what I'm saying, is love out of a pure heart. And not only that, but we're to have faith unfeigned, that is unwavering faith, continually, and a good conscience. Paul said, I have lived in good conscience unto this day. This is the goal of Christianity. I love the figure that F.W. Farrar gives pertaining to some of these Jewish fables. He said, like so many barnacles on a ship, they attach themselves, and soon enough, the ship just can't go anywhere. So it is with people who are Christians, so frequently get dabbling in all these theories and myths and ideas and concepts, and being code breakers, such as the Ben Gates of the world, and doing it from the pulpit, that now, of course, people, they're not able to have practical Christianity, or frequently, and they're more concerned with, and they have built up an appetite for the mysterious and some kind of code system in the Bible than they are in what does the Bible teach me regarding how I should live. You know, Moses warned against this many years ago. Moses did in Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 29. Remember Deuteronomy chapter 28 and 29? He warned the Jews. He said, if you do not keep the law of God, you'll be driven out of the land. Would that premillennialists and Zionists would heed these words. And then when he comes to the end of chapter 29, he says, the secret things belong unto God, but the things that are revealed belong to you and your children, that you might do them. What was he concerned about? That they would be concerned themselves with, how does God's government work? What are the mysterious things that we can find in the Bible? How are these codes to be uncovered and discovered? How are they codes to be broken? And that's what the Jews got involved in. He says, instead of that, he said, the secret things belong to God. Quit worrying yourself with those things. But instead, the things that are revealed, that is, we have enough to do to pay attention to what the Bible tells us to do in Christian living. You have enough to do. And I've known Christians who do the same thing. They spend all of their time wheedling away about these wild theories that have no basis in the Bible at all. But instead, we should be interested in godly living, love unfeigned, a good conscience before God and man, and unwavering faith. That's what we should be interested in. The lesson is yours. No Antichrist figure at all will arise. It's simply the figment of a Jewish imagination adopted by so many pulpits today. Come right now while we stand and sing if you're subject to the invitation.